Dr. Nathaniel Whitman was finishing his evening rounds at Pinewood Veterinary Clinic when a disheveled mail carrier burst through the door, clutching a trembling white bundle. 3 days later, young Timothy Harrison was still missing, with the entire town of Millfield divided over his father's desperate search efforts. When Dr. Whitman found his German shepherd, Ranger, cradling the ragdoll kitten in what looked like a protective embrace, tears streaming from both animals' eyes, he noticed orange fibers caught in the kitten's claws that made his blood run cold. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Millfield, Montana sat nestled between rolling hills and dense pine forests, the kind of small town where everyone knew everyone else's business before sundown. Main Street consisted of a handful of storefronts, the general store, Mabel's Diner, First Community Church, and tucked at the edge of town, Pinewood Veterinary Clinic. Winter had settled early this year, dusting the town with a thin layer of snow that crunched underfoot and turned breath into visible puffs of condensation. Dr. Nathaniel "Nate" Whitman had run the clinic for 15 years, though most locals would say he'd never fully integrated into the community. At 45, his once dark hair was now streaked with gray, deep lines etched around eyes that had seen too much tragedy. Folks respected his skill with animals but found him standoffish, preferring the company of his four-legged patients to their owners. Few knew about the son he'd lost 15 years ago, a case that remained unsolved, a wound that never healed. Ranger had been with Nate for 6 years, a German shepherd originally trained for police work but deemed too emotionally attached to be effective in the field. The irony wasn't lost on Nate. They were two broken souls who understood each other perfectly. Ranger's warm amber eyes carried an intelligence that sometimes unnerved visitors, his protective instincts making him an excellent clinic guardian but a poor candidate for casual interaction. Timmy Harrison was the kind of quiet child adults often overlooked, 7 years old with sandy blonde hair and eyes that seemed too solemn for his age. He'd lost his mother to cancer 2 years earlier. Since then, he'd retreated further into himself, finding comfort in animals rather than people, a tendency that frustrated his father to no end. Robert Harrison had returned from military service with invisible scars that manifested as explosive anger and an increasing dependence on alcohol. Since his wife's death, he'd struggled to connect with his sensitive son while working various blue-collar jobs to keep them afloat. The town's opinion of him was mixed. Some saw a grieving widower doing his best. Others whispered about the shouting matches heard through thin walls. Claire Summers had delivered mail in Millfield for nearly 20 years, her postal route giving her unique insights into town dynamics, and Reverend William Shepherd, with his commanding presence and booming voice, had led First Community Church for 8 years, becoming the moral compass many townsfolk looked to for guidance. None of them could have predicted how their lives would intertwine through the piercing cry of a cream-white ragdoll kitten with sky-blue eyes. The bell above the clinic door jangled violently as Claire Summers burst in, her postal uniform disheveled and her breath coming in short gasps. Outside, early evening had painted the sky a muted purple, the temperature dropping rapidly as November tightened its grip on Millfield. "Dr. Whitman," she called, clutching a small bundle wrapped in what appeared to be her uniform jacket. "I found this little one out by the old mill." Her voice trembled slightly, eyes darting toward the windows as though expecting someone to follow her. Nate emerged from the treatment room, wiping his hands on a towel. "Slow down, Claire. What's happened?" His practiced calm belied the concern that flickered across his face as he approached. Claire carefully unwrapped the bundle, revealing a cream-white kitten, no more than 8 weeks old. The small creature was shivering violently, its fur matted in places. Most striking were its eyes brilliant blue, wide with terror, yet oddly vacant. "Poor thing was just sitting there by the road," Claire explained, her fingers nervously adjusting her cap. "All alone, shaking like a leaf in this cold. Nate gently took the kitten, his veterinarian's instincts kicking in as he conducted a swift initial assessment. "Let's get her warmed up." He carried the kitten to the examination room, Claire following closely behind. Under the bright examination lights, Nate could see the kitten's condition more clearly. Though there were no obvious injuries, its behavior was concerning. The little creature remained unnaturally still during his examination, head lowered, refusing eye contact. Not typical for even a frightened cat. "Was anyone else around when you found her?" Nate asked, keeping his voice low and gentle. Claire shook her head quickly, too quickly. "No, nobody. Just finishing my route, taking the back way around to the post office." She twisted her hands together. Poor thing was just sitting there. As Nate continued his examination, running practiced hands over the small body, he felt the kitten tense when he reached the back legs. Parting the fur revealed subtle bruising, the kind that came from being handled roughly, not from a fall or accident. "I'll need you to fill out a found animal report," Nate said, watching Claire's reaction carefully. "Standard procedure." Claire's fingers tightened on her cap. "Oh, of course, but I should really get back my supervisor." "It'll only take a minute," Nate insisted, keeping his tone friendly but firm. "We need a record in case someone's looking for this little one." While Claire reluctantly completed the paperwork at the front desk, Nate prepared a small heated enclosure with soft blankets, shallow dishes of water, and soft food. The kitten allowed itself to be placed inside without struggle, curling into a tight ball in the far corner. After Claire left, practically hurrying out the door, Nate noticed something unusual. Ranger, who typically showed polite indifference to the clinic's temporary residents, had left his bed and walked over to the enclosure. The German Shepherd began to whine softly, pressing his nose against the glass, fogging it with his breath. Then, in behavior Nate had never witnessed before, Ranger lay down directly in front of the enclosure door. His posture wasn't relaxed. He was alert, focused, his eyes fixed intently on the small kitten inside. "What is it, boy?" Nate murmured, but Ranger didn't acknowledge him, remaining stationed at his self-appointed post, watching the kitten with an intensity that made the back of Nate's neck prickle with unease. The following morning, Nate arrived at the clinic to find Ranger still in the same position, having somehow worked the latch on his sleeping area door during the night. The dog acknowledged Nate with only a quick glance before returning his attention to the enclosure, where the white kitten had barely moved from its position. As Nate watched, the kitten let out a series of small, distressed cries, not the usual demanding meows of a hungry kitten, but something softer, more plaintive. Ranger's response was immediate. He pushed his nose against the glass and whined softly in return, his tail, usually wagging in the morning, remaining still. The radio played softly in the background as Nate prepared for the day's appointments. The news was dominated by one story. Police continue their search for 7-year-old Timothy Harrison, who was last seen 2 days ago near Millfield Mill. Timmy, as he's known to family and friends, was wearing an orange jacket and carrying a green backpack. Nate's jaw tightened. Cases involving children always hit him hard, stirring memories he preferred to keep buried. 15 years had passed since his own son, Michael, had disappeared walking home from school. 15 years of unanswered questions that had hollowed him out from the inside. He performed a more thorough examination of the kitten that morning, gathering samples and documenting everything with meticulous care. Under the bright lights, he noticed something he'd missed the day before: thin strands of bright orange fiber tangled in the fur around the kitten's back legs. Nate frowned, carefully extracting one with tweezers. Orange fabric, like a child's jacket, like Timmy Harrison's jacket. Just a coincidence, he told himself firmly. But he still placed the fiber in a small evidence bag and noted it in his records. The bell above the door chimed, drawing Nate from his thoughts. Robert Harrison stood in the doorway, his frame filling the space. Dark circles underscored his eyes, his unshaven face haggard with exhaustion and worry. "Dr. Whitman," he said, voice rough from what might have been shouting or crying or both. "They're saying I did something to my boy." His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "The whole damn town's whispering. Police been to my house 3 times. I need someone who'll listen." Before Nate could respond, Ranger let out a low growl, not aggressive, but alerting. Both men turned to see the German shepherd standing protectively in front of the kitten's enclosure, his body tense. Robert's eyes narrowed as he noticed the small white form behind the glass. "That cat," he began, taking a step forward. Ranger's growl deepened, stopping Robert in his tracks. "Easy, boy," Nate said quietly, though a chill ran through him at the dog's reaction. "Mr. Harrison, maybe you should start at the beginning." Outside, Reverend Shepherd's voice carried from across the street, where he was organizing volunteer search parties on the church steps, his commanding presence a stark contrast to Robert's disheveled desperation. "Someone took my boy," Robert said, his voice breaking, "and nobody believes me." As if in response, the kitten let out another soft, plaintive cry, and Ranger's protective posture intensified, his eyes never leaving Robert Harrison's face. The clinic's examination room felt too small with Robert Harrison's hulking presence filling the corner chair. Outside, sleet tapped against the windows, a fitting accompaniment to the tension that stretched between the two men. Ranger remained stationed by the kitten's enclosure, amber eyes tracking Robert's every movement. "Coffee," Nate offered, more to break the silence than out of hospitality. Robert nodded, his large hands calloused from years of manual labor gripping his knees. "Black?" As Nate poured from the pot he kept brewing for long days at the clinic, he observed Robert carefully. The man's military background showed in his posture despite his current dishevelment, shoulders squared even as his head hung low with exhaustion. "Tell me about Timmy," Nate said, handing over a chipped mug. Robert stared into the steaming liquid. "Quiet kid, too quiet since his mother passed, always got his nose in a book or wandering off to look at bugs or squirrels." A faint smile ghosted across his face before disappearing. "Not much like me. When did you last see him?" 3 days ago. Tuesday afternoon." Robert's knuckles whitened around the mug. "We had a fight that morning. Over a stupid lunchbox he lost at school. His voice faltered. "I got mad. Yelled at him about being irresponsible." Nate nodded, keeping his expression neutral despite the familiar ache in his chest. His own last conversation with Michael had been an argument about baseball practice. 15 years. And he still remembered the slam of the door. "He didn't come home after school," Robert continued. "I called the police right away, but I could tell. They looked at me like I'd done something. The whole town's looking at me the same way now." A soft cry from the enclosure drew both men's attention. The kitten had moved closer to the glass, its blue eyes fixed on Robert with what almost seemed like recognition. Ranger whined softly in response. "That cat," Robert said, setting down his mug with a sharp click. "Where'd you find it?" "Claire Summers brought her in yesterday. Said she found her out by the old mill." Nate watched Robert's reaction carefully. "Why?" Robert's face paled slightly. "Timmy mentioned feeding a white kitten. Said he found it behind the mill couple weeks ago. I told him to leave it alone. That place isn't safe. All boarded up like that." His voice roughened. But he kept going. Said the kitten needed him. Nate felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November weather. "Mr. Harrison." "Call me Robert," he interrupted. "Mr. Harrison was my father." "Robert," Nate amended. "Did Timmy tell you anything specific about where the kitten stayed? Any particular spot at the mill? Just said it was around back, near some old machinery. AC unit. I think. Robert leaned forward, sudden intensity in his gaze. You think there's a connection? Before Nate could answer, the clinic door opened with a gust of cold air. Claire Summers stood in the doorway, her postal uniform damp from the sleet, her expression freezing when she saw Robert. I was just checking on the kitten, she stammered, taking a half-step back. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Robert stood, his height making the small space seem even more cramped. You found the cat where my boy disappeared. It wasn't a question, and Claire's reaction, the way she paled, her hand clutching at the door frame, spoke volumes. Claire, Nate said carefully, moving to create space between them. I think you need to tell us exactly where you found the kitten. Something broke in Claire's composure. I didn't know what to do, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I was doing my evening collection at the mailbox near the mill. I saw... She covered her mouth with one trembling hand. What did you see? Nate pressed gently. The boy was struggling. Claire managed, her voice cracking. A man was dragging him toward the back of the building. I told myself it was probably just a father dealing with a tantrum, but the boy was so quiet, just sort of whimpering. Robert made a sound of pure anguish, a wounded animal noise that filled the small room. You saw someone taking my son and you did nothing. I was scared, Claire admitted, tears flowing freely now. What if I was wrong? What if I caused trouble for some family? And then when I found the kitten the next day, it was crying, scratching at a vent. I thought if I brought it here, someone might connect it to what I saw. But I couldn't just leave it there. Nate's mind raced, connections forming that sent ice through his veins. He moved to the examination table, gathering his tools, cotton swabs, evidence bags, a small flashlight. Claire, I need you to write down everything you remember, he said firmly. The exact time, what the man looked like, what Timmy was wearing, every detail, no matter how small. As Claire sat at the front desk, shakily documenting what she'd witnessed, Nate conducted another examination of the kitten. This time, he was looking for something specific. Under the bright light, he carefully cleaned the kitten's paws, revealing what he'd suspected, faint traces of an oily substance and small dark particles embedded in the pad of the right front paw. Industrial grease and soot, the kind that built up in old ventilation systems. The most telling evidence came when he brushed the kitten's back. A longer strand of orange fiber, looped as if it had been caught in the kitten's claws and pulled free, stood out vividly against the cream-white fur. "Robert," Nate called, his voice tight. "Come look at this." He held up the fiber, comparing it to a printed flyer describing Timmy's disappearance, with the boy's photo clearly showing his bright orange jacket. The match was unmistakable, the same vibrant shade, the same synthetic weave pattern. Robert's breathing became ragged as understanding dawned. "The kitten was with my boy." "I think so," Nate confirmed. "And I think she may have gotten out through a vent or opening that Timmy couldn't fit through. The evidence suggests she was in close contact with him. These fibers are from his jacket." A soft sound drew their attention. The room fell silent as they watched Ranger gently nudge the enclosure door with his nose. The latch, not fully secured, gave way, allowing the German shepherd to delicately grasp the kitten by the scruff and lift her out. Instead of attempting to escape, the kitten went limp in the instinctual response of a kitten to its mother. Ranger carried her to the center of the room and gently placed her on the floor. Then, in a gesture that left both men speechless, the dog curled his body around the tiny creature, creating a protective circle. The kitten nestled against Ranger's chest, and to Nate's astonishment, both animals' eyes glistened with what could only be described as tears the dogs from emotional distress, the kittens likely from physical trauma. Yet, in this embrace, they communicated something profound that transcended species. "My God," Robert whispered, dropping to his knees beside them. "They know. Somehow. They know." Nate's phone rang, breaking the moment. The caller ID showed Sheriff Thompson, and he answered quickly, putting it on speaker. "Dr. Whitman?" The sheriff's drawl came through clearly. "Got a report you might have information about the Harrison boy. Also wanted to let you know Reverend Shepard's organizing another search party at first light. Good man. Stepping up like that." Robert's head snapped up at the mention of the Reverend. "Shepard," he mouthed silently, his expression darkening. "Sheriff," Nate replied carefully, "I think you should come to the clinic. We have new evidence and a witness statement that might change the direction of your investigation." After ending the call, Nate turned to Robert, whose attention was fixed on the Reverend's name. "What is it?" "Day before Timmy disappeared," Robert said slowly. "He mentioned the Reverend stopped him after school. Said Shepard wanted to talk about God, and animals told Timmy that caring for creatures was doing the Lord's work." His jaw tightened. "Didn't think much of it then. Man's a preacher, after all." Claire appeared at the doorway, her statement complete. "The man I saw," she said quietly. "He was wearing a hat pulled low, but he was tall, broad-shouldered, and there was something else he had across. I saw it swinging from his neck when he leaned down to grab the boy." The pieces clicked into place with terrible clarity. Ranger tightened his protective embrace around the kitten, who let out a soft, mournful cry. "We need to get to the mill," Nate said, already reaching for his coat and medical bag, "and we need to get there before Reverend Shepard realizes what we know." Outside, the sleet had turned to snow, fat flakes swirling down from a sky as dark as the realization dawning on them all. The clock was ticking for Timmy Harrison, and the truth about William Shepard had only begun to reveal itself. The snow fell in silent curtains as Nate's truck bumped along the forgotten access road leading to Millfield Mill. Beside him, Robert gripped the dashboard, his knuckles white, jaw set in grim determination. In the back seat, secured in a carrier, the kitten mewed softly while Ranger pressed his nose against the cage door, refusing to be separated from his small charge. "Sheriff Thompson said he'd meet us there," Nate said, more to break the suffocating silence than to relay information Robert already knew. "Said to wait for him before going inside." Robert gave a short, humorless laugh. "If my boy's in there, you think I'm waiting for anyone?" The headlights carved yellow tunnels through the thickening snowfall, illuminating the decrepit mill that loomed ahead. Once the economic heart of Millfield, the 3-story brick structure had stood abandoned for nearly 2 decades, its windows boarded, chain-link fence surrounding the property, more symbolic than functional given the numerous gaps. "How long?" Robert asked suddenly. Nate glanced at him. "How long what?" "Your son," Claire mentioned something while writing her statement, "said that's why you understood." Robert's voice was flat, controlled. Nate's hands tightened on the steering wheel. 15 years next month. Michael was 7, same age as Timmy." "They find him?" "No." The word hung between them, heavy with implications neither man was ready to voice. The truck rolled to a stop at the edge of the mill's crumbling parking lot. Nate killed the engine but left the headlights on, illuminating the building's facade and the swirling snow. The sheriff's promised backup was nowhere in sight. "We should wait," Nate said, though he was already reaching for his coat. Robert was out of the truck before Nate finished speaking, slamming the door behind him, cursing under his breath. Nate grabbed his medical bag and flashlight, then released Ranger from the back seat, securing the leash to his collar. "Stay with me," he ordered. Though the command was unnecessary, Ranger had no intention of wandering from the carrier containing the kitten, which Nate now carefully lifted. By the time Nate caught up, Robert had already found a break in the fence and was headed toward the back of the building where the old loading dock stood derelict under sagging canopies. "Robert, wait," Nate called, his voice swallowed by the snow and wind. The beam of Robert's flashlight swept along the building's exterior, pausing at a massive HVAC unit mounted to the wall. Years of rust had eaten away at its base, creating a gap between the unit and the building's foundation. Loose pink insulation hung in clumps around a vent opening, some of it pulled outward as if something had pushed through from the inside. The hole wasn't large, maybe 6 inches across, big enough for a small, desperate kitten to squeeze through. Ranger strained at his leash, whining softly. Inside the carrier, the kitten began to cry more insistently, tiny paws pressing against the door. "She knows this place," Nate said softly. "She was here." Robert dropped to his knees, examining the vent closely. "Timmy," he called, his voice breaking. "Timmy, can you hear me?" Only the howl of the wind answered, driving snow into their faces as the night grew colder. "We need to find a way in," Robert said, already moving along the wall, testing boarded windows and chained doors. Nate set down the carrier and released the kitten, keeping Ranger on a tight leash. The German shepherd watched intently as the small white creature stretched, sniffing the air before padding determinedly toward the vent. With surprising dexterity, she navigated the snow, stopping at the opening to look back at them with those haunting blue eyes. "She wants us to follow," Nate said, though the vent was far too small for any of them. Robert had already moved to a nearby door, its chain rusted through in places. With a strength born of desperation, he pulled, the links giving way with a sharp crack. The door groaned open, releasing the stale breath of abandonment. "Timmy," Robert called into the darkness. They moved inside, Nate retrieving the kitten and following with Ranger. The interior of the mill was a cathedral of shadows, their flashlight beams cutting through layers of dust and cobwebs. Ancient machinery loomed like sleeping beasts, and the floor was treacherous with debris and rotting boards. "We should split up," Robert began, but was interrupted by the sound of a car door slamming outside. "That'll be the sheriff," Nate said, relief evident in his voice. But the footsteps that approached were too measured, too confident for someone navigating an unfamiliar hazardous site in a snowstorm. They both recognized the cadence an instant before a new flashlight beam swept over them. "Brother Harrison, Dr. Whitman?" Reverend Shepherd's resonant voice filled the cavernous space. "What brings you to this dangerous place so late at night?" Ranger's growl was low but unmistakable, his body tensing beside Nate. In the carrier, the kitten had gone completely silent. "Organizing a private search, Reverend," Nate asked, careful to keep his tone neutral even as his heart hammered against his ribs. Shepherd stepped forward, snow melting on the shoulders of his heavy black coat. The beam of his flashlight deliberately avoided their faces, instead sweeping the area around them as if searching for something or someone else. "I saw your truck from the road," Shepherd explained. "Dangerous place, this mill, structural concerns. I've warned the town council many times." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "When I saw lights, I feared some local teens might be putting themselves at risk." "We're looking for Timmy," Robert said bluntly. "Got reason to believe he might be in here." Something flickered across Shepherd's face, too quick to name, but impossible to miss. "What reason would that be?" "Brother Harrison." Before Robert could answer, a noise echoed from deeper in the mill, faint but distinct. A scraping sound, followed by what might have been a muffled cry. Robert was moving before anyone could react, plunging deeper into the darkness toward the sound. "Robert, wait," Nate called, but the man was already gone, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly as he navigated the obstacle course of abandoned equipment. "Reckless," Shepard commented, too calmly for the situation. "He'll get himself hurt rushing about like that." Ranger pulled hard at his leash, trying to follow Robert. The kitten mewed insistently from the carrier. "I should go after him," Nate said, watching Shepard carefully. "You should wait for the sheriff. He's on his way." Shepard's smile tightened. "Is he now? That's interesting, considering Sheriff Thompson is currently at the church hall coordinating tomorrow's official search." He stepped closer, deliberately blocking Nate's path. "Who exactly did you speak with?" "Dr." Nate felt ice form in his veins that had nothing to do with the winter night. He'd known Shepard for years. The man had even presided over the memorial service for his son, yet, in this moment, he was looking at a stranger. The kitten's cries grew more frantic. Ranger's growl deepened, the hair along his spine standing on end. "I need to find Robert," Nate said firmly, adjusting his grip on the carrier and Ranger's leash, preparing to push past Shepard. "You're not going anywhere," Shepard said, his voice dropping to a register Nate had never heard before. "Not with that creature." He gestured toward the carrier with undisguised disgust. "Familiars. Vessels for evil. You've allowed yourself to be deceived." "Doctor." Understanding slammed into Nate with physical force. "The kitten was yours," he breathed. "You used it to lure Timmy." Shepard's face hardened. "I saved them. The children drawn to such creatures are already corrupted. I cleanse them." His hand moved inside his coat. "Just as I tried to save your Michael." The world seemed to stop, narrowing to the space between Nate's heartbeats. "What did you say? He was such a tender-hearted boy." Shepard continued, his voice almost wistful. "Found a wounded crow on his way home from school. I offered to help him care for it." A smile spread across his face, terrible in its serenity. "I didn't go by Shepard then. Of course, names are such fluid things, aren't they? Nathaniel." Recognition dawned with horrifying clarity. William Matthews, the kindly newcomer who'd offered to help search for Michael 15 years ago, who'd comforted Nate in his grief, who'd left town shortly after the case went cold, only to return years later as Reverend William Shepard, his appearance altered by time and deliberate changes. "You're insane," Nate whispered. "I'm a shepherd protecting his flock," the Reverend corrected, withdrawing his hand from his coat to reveal a hunting knife. "The boy wasn't supposed to take the kitten. It was meant to lead him to me, not become his pet." His expression darkened. "Now it's led you to me instead. God works in mysterious ways." A crash echoed from deeper in the mill, followed by Robert's voice shouting Timmy's name. Distracted by the noise, Shepard glanced away for just a moment, enough time for Nate to act. He dropped the carrier and Ranger's leash simultaneously. "Guard," he commanded, a training signal from Ranger's police workdays. The German shepherd lunged forward, not attacking but blocking, forcing Shepard to step back as Nate scooped up the carrier and ran in the direction Robert had disappeared. The interior of the mill was a maze of rusted equipment and collapsed walkways. Nate navigated by sound, following the echoes of Robert's continued calls for his son. Ranger caught up quickly, taking the lead with a sure-footed confidence that suggested he was tracking by scent now. Behind them, Shepard's voice bounced off metal and concrete. "You can't save him, Nathaniel. You couldn't save your own son, and you can't save this one." They found Robert on the second floor, trying to shift a fallen beam that blocked a narrow maintenance corridor. His face was streaked with dust and sweat despite the cold, his hands bleeding from the effort. "He's in there," Robert gasped when he saw Nate. "I heard him. Timmy Daddy's here." A weak sound came from beyond the obstruction, unmistakably a child's voice, though no words could be made out. "Shepard's here," Nate said urgently, setting down the carrier to help with the beam. "He's the one who took Timmy and my son 15 years ago." Robert's eyes widened, then narrowed with cold fury. "That sanctimonious son of a—" He redoubled his efforts on the beam. Together, they managed to shift it enough to create a gap. The maintenance corridor beyond was barely 3 feet high, running between machinery that had once powered the mill's operations. "Timmy," Robert called again. This time, the answer was clearer. "Daddy, I'm scared." Robert was already on his hands and knees, crawling into the space without hesitation. Nate opened the carrier, and to his astonishment, the kitten shot out and followed Robert into the darkness. "I'll keep watch," Nate told Ranger, positioning himself to face the way they had come, listening for Shepard's approach. Long minutes passed, filled with the sounds of Robert navigating the cramped space, murmuring reassurances to his son. Finally, Robert's voice called back, "I've got him! He's alive!" Relief flooded through Nate, so powerful it made his knees weak. But there was no time to celebrate. Footsteps were approaching, measured and deliberate. "Robert, hurry!" Nate called. "Shepard's coming." Robert backed out of the narrow corridor, pulling a small form with him, Timmy, dirty and thin but alive, clutching the white kitten to his chest. The boy's eyes were huge in his gaunt face, his orange jacket torn and filthy. "We need to get out of here," Nate said, already helping them to their feet. "Can you walk, Timmy?" The boy nodded weakly, but as he tried to stand, his legs buckled. Robert swept him into his arms without hesitation, still cradling both his son and the kitten. "This way," Nate directed, pointing to a different stairwell than the one they'd used to ascend. "We need to get to the truck and call for real help." They had just reached the stairwell when a shot rang out, the bullet embedding itself in the wall inches from Nate's head. Shepard stood at the opposite end of the room, a revolver now replacing the knife in his hand. "The boy stays," Shepard called, his voice echoing unnaturally in the cavernous space. "He's been chosen. Get Timmy out," Nate told Robert, pushing them toward the stairs. "I'll hold him off." Robert hesitated for only a moment before nodding grimly and starting down the stairs with his precious cargo. Nate turned to face Shepard, Ranger at his side. "It's over, William. You won't take another child." "You don't understand what I do," Shepard replied, advancing slowly. "I save them from corruption, from the influence of these creatures that steal their souls." He gestured at Ranger with the gun. "Animals should serve man, not the other way around. When a child places an animal's welfare above human concerns, the balance is corrupted." "You're the corruption," Nate countered, mind racing for a way to keep Shepard talking, to give Robert and Timmy time to escape. "You hide behind faith to justify your sickness." Shepard's eyes narrowed. "Your son was the same too, attached to that crow. I tried to show him the proper order of things. When he resisted, I knew the corruption had gone too deep." Cold rage filled Nate, momentarily overriding his fear. "What did you do to Michael?" "I released him from his corruption," Shepard said simply, "as I've done for others over the years. As I will do for the Harrison boy." A sound from behind Shepard drew both their attention, the scrape of a boot on concrete. Robert stood there, having circled back through another route, his face a mask of fury. "You won't touch my son," he growled, and launched himself at Shepard. The gun went off again as the two men collided, the bullet going wild. They crashed to the floor, wrestling for control of the weapon. Nate rushed forward to help, but before he could reach them, the rotting floorboards beneath the struggling men gave way with a terrible crack. Shepard's scream cut through the night as he and Robert disappeared through the newly formed hole. Nate dropped to his knees at the edge, peering into the darkness below. Robert had managed to catch himself on a support beam, hanging precariously 15 feet above the concrete floor of the level below. Shepard hadn't been so fortunate. He lay motionless on the concrete, the gun nowhere in sight. "Robert," Nate called, already looking for a way to help him up. "Hold on. Get Timmy out first." Robert gasped, his grip visibly straining. "He's by the truck. Go!" Nate hesitated, torn between helping Robert and ensuring Timmy's safety. "Go!" Robert shouted again. "I'll be right behind you." With a reluctant nod, Nate summoned Ranger and hurried down the intact stairwell. They emerged into the snowstorm to find Timmy huddled against the truck's tire, the kitten still clutched to his chest. Both were alarmingly still. "Timmy!" Nate dropped to his knees beside the boy, medical training taking over as he checked for a pulse. It was there, weak but steady. The boy was unconscious, his skin cold to the touch. Hypothermia, dehydration, probable malnutrition. The kitten mewed weakly, seemingly understanding the gravity of the situation. Nate quickly wrapped them both in emergency blankets from his medical bag and placed them in the truck, turning the heat to full blast. Ranger jumped in beside them, immediately curling around the boy and kitten, sharing his body heat. "Stay with them," Nate ordered, though it was clearly unnecessary. The bond between the three was palpable, a living thing that transcended explanation. He turned back toward the mill, determined to help Robert. When a thunderous crash shook the night, another section of flooring collapsing, heart in his throat, Nate ran back inside, navigating the treacherous path to where he'd left Robert. The scene that greeted him stopped him cold. The support beam had given way. Both Robert and Shepard were now on the lower level, unmoving amid a chaos of splintered wood and metal. "Robert," Nate called, already searching for a way down, finding a relatively stable staircase. He made his way to the men, medical bag in hand. Robert was breathing, a deep gash on his forehead but no immediately life-threatening injuries apparent. Shepard, however, lay at an unnatural angle, his eyes open but unseeing, chest still. A quick check confirmed what Nate already knew: the fall had broken the Reverend's neck. William Matthews, the man who had taken Michael, and so many others, was dead. The wail of sirens cut through the night as Sheriff Thompson's cruiser finally arrived, followed by an ambulance. Help had come at last. But as Nate worked to stabilize Robert, he couldn't shake the feeling that for some, including his own son, it had come 15 years too late. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the mill in a shroud of white, as pure as the kitten who had led them to the truth and to Timmy Harrison. The emergency room of Millfield General Hospital pulsed with controlled chaos. Doctors and nurses moved with practiced efficiency around Timmy Harrison's small form as monitors beeped in rhythmic reassurance that the boy still clung to life. In the corner of the room, Dr. Elena Winters, the pediatric specialist flown in from Billings, spoke in hushed tones with the attending physician. Nate watched through the observation window, his body leaden with exhaustion. 20 hours had passed since they'd found Timmy at the mill. 20 hours of touch-and-go medical interventions and police questioning. Outside the window, dawn had broken on a town forever changed. "Dr. Whitman." He turned to find Sheriff Thompson approaching, his normally pressed uniform wrinkled from what had clearly been a sleepless night. The lines around his eyes had deepened considerably since they'd last spoken. "Any change?" Thompson asked, nodding toward Timmy's room. "Temperature's up to 95.6. Nate replied. "Still hypothermic but improving, severe dehydration, malnutrition, 4 days without adequate water or food." He hesitated, "and signs of prolonged restraint around his wrists and ankles." Thompson removed his hat, running a hand through thinning hair. "Jesus." And Robert, concussion, 3 broken ribs, Fractured wrist. They're keeping him for observation, but he'll recover. Nate's jaw tightened. He saved his son's life. And you saved his, Thompson countered, then let out a heavy sigh. I've got men going through Shepard's house. Found journals, records, photos. His voice lowered. Your son Michael was in there, along with at least 7 others over the past 20 years. The words hit Nate like physical blows. He'd known the moment Shepard had spoken Michael's name, but hearing it confirmed made his knees threaten to buckle. I should have seen it, Thompson continued, self-recrimination thick in his voice. All these years, he was right here, leading prayers for the very children He cut himself off, unable to complete the thought. A nurse emerged from Timmy's room, offering a nod to indicate they could enter. Inside, the boy lay still. Tubes and wires connecting him to various machines. The harsh hospital lighting emphasized his pallor, the bruised shadows beneath his eyes. Where's the cat? Thompson asked suddenly. At my clinic with Ranger. Claire's looking after them both. Nate approached Timmy's bedside, professional assessment mixing with personal anguish at the sight of the small, broken form. Timmy was holding on to her when we found him. Wouldn't let go. Even when he was barely conscious. Had to promise we'd keep her safe before he'd allow himself to be separated for treatment. Thompson shook his head in wonder. That little animal saved his life, didn't she? If she hadn't gotten out through that vent, if your dog hadn't recognized something was wrong. The sentence hung unfinished between them, the alternative too painful to voice. A soft sound from the bed drew their attention. Timmy's eyelids fluttered, then opened to reveal glazed blue eyes that slowly focused on Nate. Snowflake. The boy's voice was barely audible, cracked from dehydration. Nate leaned closer. She's safe. Timmy. My dog Ranger is looking after her. Relief washed over the child's face. She got out. I made the hole bigger for her. His cracked lips trembled. I told her to find help. She did exactly that, Nate assured him, his throat tight with emotion. She's the bravest kitten I've ever met. The bad Reverend, Timmy whispered, fear clouding his eyes. He said animals steal souls. He wanted to make me watch while he... Tears spilled down his hollow cheeks. He hurt Snowflake to punish me. Nate exchanged a glance with Thompson, whose face had hardened into a mask of professional control despite the horror in his eyes. The Reverend can't hurt anyone anymore, Nate said gently. And your dad is here in the hospital too. He helped us find you. Dad. Surprise colored the boy's weak voice. But the Reverend said Dad didn't want me anymore, that I was corrupted. Your dad never stopped looking for you. Thompson interjected, stepping closer to the bed. He's the one who realized the kitten might lead us to you. A doctor entered, moving efficiently to check Timmy's vitals. He needs rest, she said firmly, though not unkindly. You can continue this later. They stepped back into the hallway as a nurse administered another dose of medication that would help Timmy sleep. Through the window, they watched his eyelids grow heavy, then close. I need to get back to my clinic, Nate said. Check on Ranger and the kitten. Thompson nodded. I'll drive you. Your truck's still being processed as part of the scene. He hesitated. And Nate, the journals, when we're done with them as evidence, you should know there's information about Michael. Where he cleared his throat. Where he's buried. The world seemed to tilt momentarily. 15 years of uncertainty crystallizing into a terrible certainty. Nate had known, somewhere deep in his soul, that his son was gone. But knowing and knowing were entirely different things. Thank you, he managed, the words inadequate for what he was feeling. The drive to Pinewood Veterinary Clinic passed in silence, each man lost in his own thoughts. When they arrived, Claire Summers met them at the door, her face drawn with fatigue and lingering guilt. "How is he?" she asked immediately. "Holding on," Nate replied, pushing through his own emotional turmoil to offer reassurance. "Where are Ranger and Snowflake?" Claire led them to the back room where the examination table stood. The scene that greeted them was remarkable enough to momentarily drive away darker thoughts. Ranger lay curled on a blanket on the floor, his large body forming a protective circle around the tiny white kitten. As they watched, Snowflake mewed softly and Ranger responded by drawing her closer with one paw, tucking her against his chest. The kitten nestled there, her cream-white fur stark against the German Shepherd's darker coat. Most striking were their eyes, Ranger's rich amber ones watching the kitten with unmistakable concern, while Snowflake's blue gaze held a wisdom beyond her weeks. When Ranger licked the top of the kitten's head, a sound almost like a purr rumbled from his chest. "Been like that since you left," Claire said quietly. "He won't let her out of his sight. Growls if anyone but me comes too close." As if sensing they were being discussed, both animals looked up. Ranger's tail thumped once against the floor in recognition, but he made no move to leave his small charge. Thompson removed his hat, an unconscious gesture of respect for what they were witnessing. "Never seen anything like it." "Animals know," Claire said simply. "They understand things we don't." Nate approached slowly, kneeling at a respectful distance. Ranger watched him carefully, then relaxed, allowing his master to move closer. "Good boy," Nate murmured, reaching out to stroke the dog's head. "You knew all along, didn't you? You recognized what she was trying to tell us?" Ranger's eyes, soulful and intelligent, seemed to confirm this assessment. Snowflake stretched up to touch her small pink nose to Nate's hand, a gesture of such delicate trust that it brought a lump to his throat. "The boy was asking for her," Thompson said. "First thing he wanted to know when he woke up." Claire twisted her hands together. "Do you think I mean, would it be possible for them to see each other? Would it help him recover?" Nate considered this, veterinary knowledge mixing with human empathy. Animal therapy is well documented. The comfort of a beloved pet can reduce stress hormones, lower blood pressure, increase feelings of security. He stroked Snowflake gently. "If Timmy's condition stabilizes, it could be beneficial." "I'll speak with Dr. Winters," Thompson offered. "See what can be arranged." A noise from the front of the clinic interrupted them, the door opening, followed by uncertain footsteps. Ranger's ears pricked forward, but he didn't growl, suggesting the newcomer wasn't a threat. Melinda Harrison, Robert's sister-in-law and Timmy's aunt, stood in the doorway, her expression a complex mixture of hope and hesitation. "The hospital said I might find you here." She addressed Nate, then noticed the animals on the floor. "Is that her, the kitten that saved my nephew?" Nate nodded. "This is Snowflake." Melinda knelt down, careful to maintain a respectful distance from Ranger's protective circle. "Hello, little one," she said softly. "Thank you for bringing Timmy back to us." Her voice caught. "Robert's awake. He asked me to come check on the cat, to make sure she's all right. He said—" She paused, blinking back tears. "He said she's family now." The statement hung in the air, powerful in its simplicity and acceptance. For a man who had once forbidden his son from keeping pets, who had struggled to connect with his sensitive child, this represented a profound transformation. "She'll need a home," Nate said carefully. "Once Timmy's released from the hospital, she'll have one," Melinda assured him. "With us. Robert's already talking about converting his workshop into a proper space for a lady cat, as he put it." A small smile touched her lips. I haven't seen him this focused on anything since Sarah died," as if understanding she was being discussed. Snowflake stood and stretched, her small body arching delicately. Then, to everyone's surprise, she stepped out of Ranger's protective circle and approached Melinda, sniffing her outstretched hand before rubbing against it with a soft purr. Ranger watched carefully but made no move to retrieve his charge, seemingly satisfied with the interaction. "She approves," Claire observed with a quiet laugh. The moment was interrupted by Thompson's radio crackling to life, summoning him back to the station. As he made his apologies and departed, Melinda continued her gentle interaction with Snowflake. "The whole town's talking," she said, not looking up from the kitten. "About Shepard, about what he did. People can't believe they trusted him with their children, invited him into their homes." Nate leaned against the examination table, suddenly exhausted. "People see what they expect to see. He presented himself as a man of God, and the town needed someone to believe in. They're saying he took other children before, from other towns." Melinda finally looked up, her eyes searching Nate's face. "That your son was one of them." "Yes." The single word carried the weight of 15 years of grief. Melinda reached out, briefly touching his hand. "I'm so sorry. Dr. Whitman." Ranger had risen now, padding over to press against Nate's leg in silent support. The dog had always seemed to know when the memories threatened to overwhelm him. "The sheriff says they found evidence," Nate managed, his voice rough. "About Michael and the others. It's over now." "Is it?" Melinda asked gently. "Over?" The question hung between them, complex in its simplicity. For Shepard's victims, including Michael, it was tragically over. For Timmy, the ordeal of captivity had ended. But the journey of recovery was just beginning. For Robert, a new chapter of fatherhood was opening, one that would require patience and understanding. And for Nate himself, 15 years of uncertainty had crystallized into grief anew. Yet alongside it stood the knowledge that he had helped save another boy from his son's fate, that through Ranger's inexplicable bond with Snowflake, some measure of justice had finally been served. "Not over," he answered finally, "but perhaps beginning again." Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving Millfield blanketed in pristine white. Through the clinic window, Nate could see the town beginning to stir, doors opening, people emerging to clear driveways and check on neighbors. Life continuing, as it always did, even in the wake of tragedy. Snowflake returned to Ranger's side, the unlikely pair settling back onto their blanket. As Nate watched them together, the powerful Shepard and the delicate Kitten, each drawing comfort from the other's presence, he felt something shift within his chest. Not healing, not yet, but perhaps the possibility of it. A door opening where before there had been only walls. 3 days after Timmy Harrison's rescue, Millfield Memorial Hospital had settled into a quieter rhythm. The initial flurry of media attention had subsided, leaving hallways that now echoed with ordinary hospital sounds rather than the frantic energy of a breaking news story. In Timmy's room, morning sunlight filtered through half-drawn blinds, casting gentle stripes across the child's bed. Robert Harrison sat in the visitor's chair, his own injuries evident in the cast on his wrist and the careful way he held himself to accommodate broken ribs. For the past hour, he'd been reading aloud from a battered copy of The Call of the Wild, his deep voice softened for his son's benefit. Timmy's recovery had been slow but steady. The severe dehydration and hypothermia had resolved, but the psychological trauma manifested in nightmares that woke him screaming. The only thing that seemed to truly calm him was talk of Snowflake, the cream-white kitten who had escaped to bring help. "Dad," Timmy interrupted, his voice stronger than it had been but still bearing the fragile quality of recent trauma. Robert looked up from the book. "What is it, buddy? Do you think—" Timmy hesitated, fingers plucking nervously at his blanket. "Do you think what Reverend Shepherd said was true about animals stealing people's souls?" Robert's face darkened momentarily before he controlled his expression. Setting the book aside, he leaned forward, his good hand covering his son's. "No, Timmy, that wasn't true. None of what he told you was true." He chose his words carefully, aware of the hospital psychologist's guidance about honesty without overwhelming detail. Reverend Shepherd was sick. He believed things that weren't real. But at church, he always talked about God and what was right. Timmy pressed, confusion evident in his young face. "How do I know what's really true?" The question hung in the air, weighty with implications beyond a 7-year-old's theological curiosity. Robert, who had never been a religious man even before his wife's death, had further shaken his faith, found himself searching for wisdom he wasn't sure he possessed. "I think," he said slowly, "that kindness is always true. Your kindness to Snowflake wanting to help her, protect her, that was true and good. Anyone who tells you different is wrong, no matter what title they have." The answer seemed to satisfy Timmy, who nodded thoughtfully before asking the question he'd asked every day since regaining consciousness. "When can I see Snowflake?" As if summoned by the question, a gentle knock came at the door. Dr. Whitman stood there, accompanied by Dr. Winters and, most surprisingly, Ranger on a leash, sitting obediently at Nate's side. "We have a surprise for you, Timmy," Dr. Winters said, stepping into the room. "Dr. Whitman has been working with the hospital administration, and we've approved a special visitor for you." She turned to Nate with a nod. Nate stepped aside to reveal Claire Summers, who stood in the hallway holding a small animal carrier. She entered with a nervous smile, setting the carrier on the foot of Timmy's bed. "Someone's been very anxious to see you," she said, unlatching the door. A moment later, a cream-white face with striking blue eyes peered out cautiously. Timmy's gasp was audible, his face transforming with a joy so pure it brought tears to the adult's eyes. "Snowflake," he whispered, reaching out trembling hands. The kitten needed no further invitation. She emerged fully from the carrier and made her way up the bed with delicate steps, her eyes never leaving Timmy's face. When she reached him, she stretched up to touch her pink nose to his, then settled against his chest with a rumbling purr that seemed impossibly loud for such a small creature. Timmy wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her soft fur. His shoulders began to shake with silent sobs, not of fear or pain, but of relief and release. Robert watched, his own eyes wet, as his son found comfort in the animal's presence that no human had been able to provide. The same animal he had once forbidden Timmy from feeding. The irony wasn't lost on him. "The hospital has approved daily visits," Dr. Winters explained quietly to Robert. "Animal therapy has shown remarkable benefits for trauma recovery, especially in children." Ranger had moved closer to the bed, his attention fixed on Snowflake and Timmy. The German Shepherd's protective instinct toward the kitten had extended to the boy, creating a triangular bond that defied easy explanation. "How's he been doing?" Nate asked, nodding toward Timmy, who was now whispering something into Snowflake's ear. "Nightmares," Robert replied simply. "Bad ones. He wakes up thinking he's still in that—" He couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. The image of his son trapped in that narrow maintenance shaft too painful to verbalize. Nate nodded in understanding. "It will take time, but children are resilient, especially when they have support." He watched as Ranger settled at the foot of the bed, his eyes never leaving Snowflake and Timmy. And it seems he has quite the support system. The reunion continued for nearly an hour, the adults conversing quietly while Timmy and Snowflake re-established their bond. The kitten never strayed from the boy's side, her purrs a constant soothing presence in the room. Even when Timmy eventually drifted off to sleep, exhausted by emotion, Snowflake remained curled against his neck, her own eyes half closed in contentment. "I've never seen anything like it," Dr. Winters commented softly to Nate as they prepared to leave. "The immediate drop in his stress response is remarkable. His heart rate, blood pressure, even his breathing pattern all improved within minutes of the kitten's arrival." "Animals know," Nate replied, unconsciously echoing Claire's words from days earlier. "They understand things we don't." Robert walked them to the door, moving carefully to avoid jarring his ribs. "Thank you," he said simply, "for bringing her, for finding him, for—" He gestured helplessly, unable to articulate the full depth of his gratitude. Nate clasped his shoulder gently. "Ranger and Snowflake did the real work. I just followed their lead." As they left, Robert returned to his son's bedside. For the first time since Timmy's rescue, the boy's face was peaceful in sleep, one small hand resting protectively on Snowflake's back. Unable to resist, Robert gently touched his son's hair, marveling at the miracle of his survival and the unlikely chain of events that had led to his rescue. "You're right, Dr. Whitman," he whispered to the empty room. "Animals do know." Later that evening, after Snowflake had been reluctantly returned to the clinic with promises of another visit tomorrow, Nate found himself standing in the small cemetery on the outskirts of Millfield. The snow had been cleared from the pathways, but it still blanketed the graves in pristine white, creating an otherworldly peace. He had avoided this place for years, the empty memorial for his son too painful to visit when there had been no body, no closure. But Sheriff Thompson's revelation had changed that. Now, at least, he knew. The not knowing had been its own special torture. Ranger stood beside him, a solid presence in the gathering dusk. The dog had been subdued since their return from the hospital, as if sensing the weight of emotion his master carried. "They found him, Michael," Nate said softly to the small headstone that bore his son's name and two dates far too close together. "They know what happened to you now?" His voice broke. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you." Ranger pressed against his leg, offering silent comfort as Nate's tears fell, freezing almost instantly in the bitter cold. The grief was raw again, the wound reopened, but somehow cleaner now, without the festering uncertainty that had poisoned his life for 15 years. "A little boy is alive because of what happened to you," he continued after a moment, wiping his eyes. "If I hadn't recognized the signs, if I hadn't known what to look for—" He shook his head. "I don't believe in silver linings, not for something like this, but I have to believe your life and death meant something." As if in answer, Ranger suddenly turned his head, alert to something Nate couldn't perceive. The German shepherd's ears perked forward, his posture attentive rather than alarmed. From the edge of the cemetery, a figure approached Robert Harrison, his breath clouding in the cold air. He stopped a respectful distance away, clearly unsure if his presence was welcome. "Sheriff Thompson told me where you might be," Robert explained. "I wanted to thank you again, properly." He glanced at the headstone, understanding dawning in his eyes. "This is your boy." "Yes," Nate said simply. Robert was quiet for a long moment. "Timmy told me what happened in there, how Snowflake got out." He met Nate's gaze directly. "He made that hole bigger for her, even though it meant he couldn't escape himself. Said he knew she'd find help somehow." A pause, heavy with meaning. That's because of you. Because you raised a dog that could understand what she was trying to tell us." The words were simple but profound, an acknowledgement that while Nate couldn't save his own son, his life's work had helped save another's. It wasn't redemption exactly, but perhaps it was a step toward healing. The two men stood in silence as darkness settled over the cemetery, the first stars appearing in the clear winter sky. Between them, Ranger remained alert, watching over them both with the same protective instinct that had led him to embrace a crying kitten and change the course of all their lives. 2 weeks after his rescue, Timmy Harrison was finally coming home. The modest 2-bedroom house on Maple Street had undergone a transformation in preparation for his arrival. Robert, still healing from his own injuries, had enlisted help from neighbors who had once whispered accusations but now brought casseroles and offers of assistance, their guilt manifesting in acts of service. The most significant change was in Robert's former workshop, the cluttered space where he'd once retreated to nurse beers and grievances. Now, the room had been cleared, cleaned, and converted into what Melinda laughingly called the most elaborate cat suite in Montana. A carpeted cat tree stood in the corner, complete with dangling toys and cozy hiding spots. A plush bed with Snowflake embroidered on the side sat beneath the window, positioned to catch afternoon sunlight. Shelves lined one wall, stocked with high-quality cat food, treats, and supplies that had depleted what remained of Robert's savings. "Think she'll like it?" Robert asked as he made final adjustments to a small water fountain designed for feline hydration. His cast made the work awkward, but he persisted with uncharacteristic patience. "She'll love it," Melinda assured him, smiling at this unexpected side of her gruff brother-in-law. "Though I suspect she'll spend more time in Timmy's room than anywhere else." Robert nodded, his expression softening. "Yeah, well, she's earned the right to sleep wherever she wants in this house." The hospital discharge had been scheduled for noon. Dr. Whitman had arranged to bring Snowflake directly from the clinic to the house, ensuring a reunion that the hospital psychologist believed would ease Timmy's transition home. The boy had improved physically but remained guarded with adults, speaking openly only to his father and, surprisingly, to Nate. When Robert's truck pulled into the driveway at 12:30, Nate was already waiting on the porch, Snowflake secure in a carrier and Ranger sitting attentively beside him. The German shepherd's ears perked forward as the truck doors opened and Timmy emerged, still moving carefully but with growing strength. The boy's face, which had remained solemn during the drive from the hospital, transformed at the sight of Snowflake. He hurried forward as quickly as his recovering body allowed, dropping to his knees before the carrier. "Hi, Snowflake," he whispered, fingers reaching through the grate to touch the kitten's soft fur. "I'm home now." "We both are." Nate opened the carrier and Snowflake emerged with dignified composure. She stretched, surveyed her surroundings with those intelligent blue eyes, then delicately made her way to Timmy. Their reunion was a quiet thing, the kitten pressing her forehead against the boy's chin, Timmy's arms encircling her with gentle reverence, both of them seeming to communicate in a language beyond human understanding. Ranger watched with apparent satisfaction before turning his attention to Robert, who had approached more slowly, mindful of his ribs. "Dr. Whitman," Robert acknowledged, extending his good hand. "Thank you for bringing her." Nate shook the offered hand. "Ranger would have had my hide if I'd tried to keep her at the clinic another day. He's grown quite attached." Indeed. The German shepherd had positioned himself protectively near Timmy and Snowflake, creating a triangle of mutual vigilance that had become familiar to all who witnessed it. "Come inside," Robert invited. "I want to show Timmy what we've done for Snowflake." And the tour of Snowflake's suite, as Melinda insisted on calling it, produced the first genuine smile anyone had seen on Timmy's face since his ordeal. He walked slowly around the room, Snowflake cradled in his arms, pointing out each feature to the kitten as if she might miss something. "Look, Snowflake, your own window, and toys, and Dad got you the good food, not the cheap stuff." He turned to Robert, eyes shining. "She loves it, Dad, I can tell." Robert cleared his throat, clearly affected by his son's approval. "Well, she's part of the family now. Isn't that right, Dr. Whitman?" "Absolutely," Nate agreed, watching as Ranger settled himself near the door, content to observe but unwilling to intrude on the kitten's new territory. The afternoon passed in quiet domesticity. Melinda prepared lunch. Robert fussed over making sure Timmy was comfortable on the living room sofa, and Snowflake explored her new domain with feline curiosity. The kitten never strayed far from Timmy, however, returning frequently to check on him with gentle headbutts and purrs. It was during a moment of relative privacy, when Melinda had gone to the kitchen and Timmy was dozing on the sofa with Snowflake curled beside him, that Robert broached the subject that had clearly been weighing on him. "Sheriff Thompson told me they found more evidence at Shepard's house," he said quietly to Nate, who sat in an adjacent armchair with Ranger at his feet. "Journals going back 20 years, photos, records." He hesitated, glancing toward his sleeping son. "Said there were others before Michael and Timmy." Nate nodded, his expression carefully controlled. 8 that they know of, across 4 states. Shepard, or Matthews, as he was known then, moved frequently. Changed his name, his appearance. He was methodical. And no one suspected. Robert's voice held wonder and horror in equal measure. A man of God. Someone people trusted with their children. "The most dangerous predators are the ones who appear safest," Nate replied, unconsciously reaching down to stroke Ranger's fur. "They understand what we want to believe, and they use it against us." Robert was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on Timmy's peaceful form. "Thompson said something else, said they found evidence that Shepard targeted children who showed special attachment to animals, that he believed it was some kind of, he struggled for the word, corruption, that animals could steal human souls if people loved them too much." "Yes," Nate confirmed. His journals detailed his beliefs. They were elaborate, delusional. "My boy nearly died because he was kind to a stray cat." Robert's voice broke. "Because I told him to stop feeding her. If I'd just let him bring her home in the first place." "You can't think that way," Nate interjected firmly. "Shepard would have found another reason, another child." "The fault lies with him, not with you." "I know that here," Robert tapped his temple, "but not here." He placed his hand over his heart. "I keep thinking about all the times I got angry because Timmy wasn't the son I expected, because he preferred books to baseball, because he cried easily, because he wanted to save every damn stray that crossed his path." His eyes were damp now. "All the things that make him who he is, I tried to change them. And then I almost lost him." Nate understood the crushing weight of parental regret all too well. "You have a second chance now," he said quietly. "Not many get that." Robert nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I know. Believe me. I know." He looked at Nate directly. "Thompson told me about Michael. That they found—" He trailed off, unwilling to put the grim details into words. "Where Shepard buried him," Nate finished, his voice steady despite the pain that lanced through him. "Yes. They'll be recovering his remains next week, once the forensic team arrives from the state crime lab. Will there be a funeral? A proper one? I mean, yes." The word came out more roughly than Nate had intended. He cleared his throat. After 15 years of not knowing, of having an empty grave to visit, yes, there will be a proper burial. Before Robert could respond, A small sound from the sofa drew their attention. Timmy had awakened, his eyes immediately seeking Snowflake, who stretched and yawned beside him. The kitten's blue eyes opened, meeting the boy's gaze with what could only be described as recognition and affection. "Dad," Timmy called softly, "can Snowflake sleep in my room tonight?" "Of course, buddy," Robert replied without hesitation. "Wherever you want her to be." Timmy smiled, clearly reassured, then noticed the adult's serious expressions. "Is something wrong?" "No, son," Robert assured him. "Dr. Whitman and I were just talking about how sometimes the hardest things can lead to important changes." Timmy considered this with the peculiar gravity of a child who has experienced more than his years should allow. Like how if Snowflake hadn't been at the mill, I wouldn't have been there either. But then she wouldn't have saved me. The simple wisdom of this observation left both men momentarily speechless. It was Nate who finally responded. "Exactly like that, Timmy." He glanced at Ranger, then back to the boy and Kitten. "Sometimes the connections we form, even unexpected ones, can save us in ways we never imagined." As if to illustrate this point, Ranger rose and moved to the sofa, gently resting his muzzle near Snowflake. The kitten responded by touching her small pink nose to his, a gesture of recognition between unlikely allies who had forged a bond that transcended their natural differences. In that quiet moment, as twilight gathered outside the Harrison home, the truth of Nate's words seemed to settle over them all, that healing often comes through connections we neither expect nor understand, but must simply accept with gratitude. 1 month after Timmy Harrison's rescue, Millfield emerged from winter's grip into the tentative warmth of early spring. The snow had receded, revealing tender shoots of green pushing through soil that had seemed barren only weeks before. It was Saturday morning, and Pinewood Veterinary Clinic bustled with the ordinary chaos of weekend appointments, vaccinations for puppies, checkups for aging cats, the occasional exotic pet requiring specialized care. Nate moved through it all with a quiet efficiency that his staff had come to appreciate even more in recent weeks. The changes in him were subtle but unmistakable, a softening around the eyes, a newfound patience with difficult clients, occasional smiles that no longer seemed forced. Grief still lived within him, as it always would, but it had somehow shifted from a crushing weight to a companion he had learned to carry with dignity. The burial of Michael's remains 2 weeks prior had provided a closure that 15 years of uncertainty could not. The service had been small but meaningful, attended by those who remembered the bright-eyed boy and those who had come to support his father. Robert and Timmy Harrison had stood solemnly beside Nate throughout, a gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes about the bond forged through shared trauma and healing. The bell above the clinic door chimed, drawing Nate from his thoughts. Ranger, who had been resting in his usual spot behind the reception counter, immediately perked up, tail wagging with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. Only one visitor elicited such a response these days. "Hello, Dr. Whitman," Timmy called, stepping inside with Snowflake perched comfortably on his shoulder, her cream-white fur gleaming in the morning sunlight. Behind him came Robert, carrying a large paper bag that emitted promising aromas. "Right on time," Nate greeted them, checking his watch. "How are my favorite patients today?" "Snowflake's not a patient anymore," Timmy corrected with the earnest precision of childhood. "She's here for a play date with Ranger." This weekly ritual had evolved naturally after Snowflake's adoption. The bond between the German Shepherd and the ragdoll kitten had not diminished with separation. If anything, it had deepened into something that fascinated the veterinarian in Nate even as it touched the man. "I brought breakfast," Robert added, lifting the bag. "Figured you might not have eaten yet." This, too, had become tradition, Robert arriving with food from Mabel's diner, insisting it was the least he could do in return for accommodating these Saturday morning visits. The three would share a meal in Nate's small office, while Ranger and Snowflake engaged in their peculiar form of communication. Claire emerged from an examination room, clipboard in hand, smiling at the sight of Timmy and Snowflake. Since the events at the mill, she had become a fixture at the clinic, volunteering part-time between her postal duties, her way of making amends for her initial silence. "There's my favorite girl," she cooed, reaching out to scratch under Snowflake's chin. The kitten, now nearly full-grown, purred in response but made no move to leave Timmy's shoulder. "She's been waiting all week," Timmy informed her solemnly. "She sits by the window every morning and watches for the mail truck." Claire laughed softly. "Smart girl. She knows I always bring treats." As if on cue, she produced a small cat treat from her pocket, which Snowflake accepted with regal grace before turning her attention to Ranger. The German shepherd had approached with dignified restraint, but his wagging tail betrayed his excitement. Nate led everyone to his office. Clearing space on his desk for the breakfast, Robert unpacked pancakes, bacon, scrambled eggs, and Mabel's famous blueberry muffins. As they settled in to eat, Ranger and Snowflake engaged in their unique reunion ritual. First came the careful sniffing, Ranger lowering his massive head to the kitten's level, Snowflake reaching up to touch her nose to his. Then a gentle nudge from the dog, followed by a playful swat from the cat. Finally, the moment that never failed to amaze anyone who witnessed it, Ranger lying down, front paws extended, and Snowflake stepping delicately into his embrace, settling against his chest as if coming home. "Still can't believe it," Robert commented around a mouthful of pancake, watching the animals. "Never seen anything like it." "Their bond formed during trauma," Nate explained. "Not for the first time." Ranger recognized Snowflake's distress when she arrived at the clinic, and somehow understood she was trying to communicate about Timmy. That kind of connection doesn't just disappear. "Like me and Snowflake," Timmy added quietly. "We went through the bad things together." The adults exchanged glances, aware of the progress Timmy had made, but conscious of the road still ahead. The nightmares had decreased, but not disappeared entirely. The boy still startled at loud noises and remained wary around strangers, especially men in positions of authority. But there were also signs of healing. He had returned to school part-time, had begun to reconnect with a few close friends, and spoke more openly about his feelings in therapy sessions. "Speaking of connections," Robert said, turning to Nate, "Timmy and I have been talking. We have an idea we wanted to run by you." Nate raised an eyebrow, setting down his coffee. "I'm listening." "Tell him, Timmy," Robert encouraged. Timmy straightened in his chair, clearly having rehearsed this moment. "We think there should be a special place where rescue animals can help kids who've been through scary things, like how Snowflake and Ranger helped me." His eyes were bright with enthusiasm. "Dad says we could use the money from selling our house to start it. We're moving to Aunt Melinda's farm anyway, and there's lots of space there for animals." "The Harrison Whitman Foundation," Robert added. "Animal therapy for traumatized children. Obviously, we'd need a veterinarian involved." He met Nate's gaze directly. "Someone who understands both animals and trauma." Nate sat back, genuinely surprised. The idea resonated in unexpected ways, touching on aspects of healing he'd been considering himself since Michael's proper burial. "It would mean expanding my practice," he said slowly, "bringing on another vet to handle regular appointments while I focused on the therapy program. We've already spoken with Dr. Winters," Robert continued. "She's on board for the psychological oversight, and the town council's interested. Seems they're eager to support something positive after everything with Shepherd." Across the room, Ranger and Snowflake had shifted positions. The kitten now lay stretched along the dog's back, her cream-white fur stark against his darker coat, both watching the humans with what appeared to be knowing interest. "In memory of Michael," Timmy said quietly. "Dad told me about your son, how he liked animals too." Something tightened in Nate's chest. Not the familiar constriction of grief, but a different sensation altogether. Possibility, perhaps, purpose. "I think," he said carefully, "that's an idea worth exploring." As sunlight streamed through the office window, casting a warm glow over them all, man and boy, dog and cat, each connected to the others through an alchemy of tragedy and healing. Nate felt something he hadn't experienced in 15 years, the quiet certainty that life, despite its wounds, could still unfold in directions both unexpected and profound. He looked at Ranger, his faithful companion who had somehow known to embrace a crying kitten, and at Snowflake, whose determined escape had saved a child, and finally at Timmy and Robert Harrison, father and son rebuilding their relationship one day at a time. In this unlikely assembly, formed through circumstances none would have chosen, Nate recognized the shape of a future he could embrace. "The Harrison Whitman Foundation," he repeated, tasting the words and finding them good. "Yes, I think we can make that work. In our twilight years, we understand what truly matters, not the wealth we've accumulated or status we've achieved, but the connections that sustain us through life's darkest moments." The story of Dr. Whitman, little Timmy, and the unlikely bond between Ranger and Snowflake reminds us that healing comes in unexpected packages, often with forepaws and unconditional love. Many of us have weathered profound losses, children, spouses, dreams we had to surrender, and like Nate, we've carried grief as a constant companion. But remember this, even after 15 years of unanswered prayers, Nate found purpose again, even after losing his way as a father. Robert discovered a second chance. The German shepherd who embraced a crying kitten shows us that protection and comfort can cross all boundaries. As we face our own winter seasons, may we recognize the snowflakes in our lives, those small, unexpected gifts that lead us toward healing and redemption. It's never too late to rebuild, to form new bonds, to create meaning from our deepest sorrows. The Harrison Whitman Foundation wasn't just about animals helping children. It was about broken souls finding wholeness together. And isn't that, after all, what we're all searching for? I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.